The woman pulled something from her pocket. Simon Cowell's face froze. His mouth hung open. For 15 seconds, he couldn't say a single word. What she'd hidden in that drawer changed everything. It was July 2023. America's Got Talent. The Dolby Theater in Los Angeles. Another Tuesday taping. Another packed audience. Another line of hopeful contestants waiting backstage for their moment under the lights. Simon Cowell sat at the judge's desk in his usual position. Black shirt, arms crossed, that familiar expression of skeptical anticipation. He'd been doing this for years. Thousands of auditions. Singers, dancers, magicians, comedians. He'd seen it all. Heard it all. Nothing surprised him anymore. Or so he thought. The stage manager called the next act. Number 347. Rebecca Morrison from Seattle, Washington. A woman walked onto the stage. Middle-aged, maybe late 40s. Simple cardigan. Slacks. No costume. No props visible. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her eyes darting between the judges and the audience. Host Terry Crews greeted her with his trademark enthusiasm. "Welcome to America's Got Talent! Rebecca, tell us about yourself." "I'm a nurse," Rebecca said, her voice quiet, almost apologetic. "I work in pediatric oncology. I've been doing it for 23 years. "That's amazing," Terry said warmly. "That must be incredibly difficult work." "It is," Rebecca agreed. "But it's also the most important thing I've ever done." Simon leaned forward slightly. "And what will you be doing for us today?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out something small. From the judge's desk, it was hard to see exactly what, a photograph, maybe, or a letter. Something old and worn at the edges. She held it against her chest with both hands. Before I do anything," Rebecca said, her voice starting to shake, "I need to tell you a story. And I need to show you this." She held up the object toward the judges. It was a photograph. Faded. Creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. Simon squinted, trying to see it from across the stage. Something about the image looked familiar, but he couldn't quite. And then his entire body went rigid. Simon stopped the show. No one knew what was happening. The expression on Simon's face shifted from curiosity to confusion to something the other judges had rarely seen, complete shock. His mouth opened but no sound came out. His hand gripped the edge of the judge's desk so tightly his knuckles went white. Howie Mandel leaned toward him. "Simon? You okay?" Simon didn't respond. He was staring at that photograph like it had reached across the stage and stopped his heart. Rebecca's eyes were locked on Simon too, tears already streaming down her face. "You don't remember me," she said. "But I remember you. Every single day for the past 19 years I remember you." The audience fell into confused silence. This wasn't how auditions worked. There was supposed to be a performance, a talent, something to judge. Not this strange, intense moment between a contestant and a judge who looked like he'd seen a ghost. Terry Crews, sensing something profound was happening, stepped back quietly, giving Rebecca space. "That photograph." Simon's voice finally emerged, rough and uncertain. "Where did you get that photograph?" Rebecca's hands trembled as she held it. "You gave it to me. December 2004. In a hospital in Manchester. You came to visit the children's cancer ward during the Christmas season. You spent 3 hours there. You thought no one would remember." Simon stood up. Not the casual standing he sometimes did during performances. This was abrupt, almost involuntary, like his body acted before his brain could process. His chair scraped backward loudly. "I remember," he said quietly. Then louder, his voice carrying across the theater. "I remember." The control room erupted in chaos. Producers were shouting into headsets, trying to understand what was happening, whether to cut to commercial, whether this was planned. But something in the raw authenticity of the moment kept the cameras rolling. Backstage, producers were begging him to continue, but he didn't. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in December 2004. Simon Cowell wasn't always the global television mogul he is today. Well, by 2004 he was already famous. Pop Idol and American Idol had made him a household name, the sharp-tongued judge everyone loved to hate. But he was also dealing with something private, something he never discussed publicly. His father, Eric Cowell, had died earlier that year. Cancer. It had been brutal and fast, and Simon had watched his father deteriorate over months, helpless to stop it. That Christmas, Simon was in Manchester for work, some television production meeting he barely remembers now. His assistant mentioned that a local children's hospital had requested a celebrity visit to the cancer ward. Most of the children were too sick to go home for the holidays. Simon's first instinct was to say no. He was grieving. He was busy. He didn't do hospital visits, it wasn't his thing. But something made him say yes. Maybe it was thinking about his father. Maybe it was the approaching holiday. Maybe it was just timing. He showed up at Manchester Children's Hospital on December 23rd, no cameras, no press, just him and his assistant. The hospital administrator seemed shocked that he'd actually come. The pediatric oncology ward was on the 4th floor. 16 children. Ages ranging from 4 to 14. Some bald from chemotherapy. Some so weak they could barely sit up. All of them spending Christmas in hospital beds instead of at home with their families. Simon spent 3 hours there. He didn't know what to say half the time. He wasn't good with kids, wasn't good with illness, wasn't good with any of this. But he sat with each child. He asked about their favorite music. He made terrible jokes. He signed autographs on get-well cards. There was one girl. 11 years old. Her name was Sophie. She had acute lymphoblastic leukemia and had been in treatment for 2 years. She was tiny, fragile, her skin almost translucent from the treatment. She was also fiercely intelligent and had absolutely no filter. "You're mean on TV," she told Simon directly, no hesitation. "I know," Simon said, surprised by her directness. "But you're not mean here," Sophie continued, studying his face with those huge eyes. "Why are you nicer to sick kids than to singers?" Simon didn't have an answer for that. He just sat there, slightly off balance, while this tiny girl in a hospital gown saw right through him. "Can I tell you a secret?" Sophie asked. "Of course. I'm not going to make it," she said matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather. "The doctors don't say it, but I know. The treatment isn't working anymore." Simon felt his throat tighten. "You don't know that. You have to keep fighting." "I am fighting," Sophie said. "But fighting doesn't always mean winning. Sometimes it just means not being scared." They sat together for 20 minutes. Sophie told him about her favorite songs, about her dreams of becoming a doctor someday, about her little sister who was only 6 and didn't really understand why Sophie couldn't come home. When it was time for Simon to leave, Sophie asked him for a photograph. Not an autograph, a photograph. She handed her disposable camera to the nurse. The photo showed Simon sitting on the edge of Sophie's hospital bed, her tiny hand in his, both of them smiling despite everything. It wasn't posed. It wasn't rehearsed. It was just a moment. "Can I keep this?" Sophie asked after the nurse snapped it. "It's your camera," Simon said. "No, I mean, can you keep one too? So you remember?" The nurse printed 2 copies from the hospital's photo printer. Sophie kept one. She handed the other to Simon. "Remember what?" Simon asked. "That people matter more than being right," Sophie said simply. Simon left the hospital that night with the photograph in his jacket pocket. He flew back to London the next day. He told himself he'd follow up, check on the children, maybe visit again. He never did. 3 weeks later, his assistant mentioned casually that she'd received a note from Manchester Children's Hospital. "What of the children from the visit? a girl named Sophie, had passed away on January 8th. The family had requested Simon's address to send a thank you note for the visit. Simon remembered standing in his office, staring at that message, feeling the weight of it. He found the photograph still in his jacket pocket, creased now from being carried around. He looked at Sophie's smile in that picture, at her small hand in his, and felt something crack inside him. He put the photograph in his desk drawer. He told himself he'd frame it someday, honor her memory properly. He never did. The photograph stayed in that drawer for years, hidden away with all the things he didn't know how to process. Until tonight. July 2023. When a woman named Rebecca Morrison walked onto the America's Got Talent stage holding that exact photograph. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this performance is still ahead. Simon was standing now, his hands still gripping the judge's desk but his body leaning forward, trying to understand what he was seeing. "You're Sophie's nurse," he said, the realization hitting him. "You were there that night." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming freely now. "I was Sophie's primary nurse for the entire 2 years she was in treatment. I was there when you visited. I was the one who took that photograph. But how do you have it?" "I have the only copy, it's in my—" Simon stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. "I have it in my office. In London." "How do you have it?" "Sophie made copies," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "Before she died, she made me promise something. She gave me this photograph and she made me swear that one day, if I ever got the chance, I would show it to you." The audience was completely silent now. Every person in the Dolby Theatre leaning forward, trying to understand what they were witnessing. "Why?" Simon's voice was barely above a whisper, but the microphones caught it perfectly. Rebecca took a shaky breath. "Because Sophie wanted you to know something. She spent her last 3 weeks writing you a letter. She was so weak by then, it took her days to finish it. She gave it to me the night before she died." Rebecca reached into her other pocket and pulled out an envelope. Old. Worn. The edges soft from being handled carefully over 19 years. "I've kept this in my dresser drawer since 2005, Rebecca said. "I've read it 1,000 times. And every time, I thought about finding you, giving it to you. But I was scared. You were famous. I was nobody. How do you just walk up to Simon Cowell and hand him a letter from a dead 11-year-old? She held up both the photograph and the envelope. But then I saw the audition announcement for AGT. And I thought, maybe this is the chance Sophie was waiting for. But what happened next, no one in the theater, or watching at home, could ever forget. Simon didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for Terry Crews to facilitate. He didn't check with the producers or the other judges. He simply walked onto the stage. The audience gasped. The other judges stood. Howie and Heidi and Sophia all watching with tears in their eyes, understanding they were witnessing something that transcended television. Simon crossed the stage to where Rebecca stood, still holding the photograph and letter with trembling hands. He stopped directly in front of her, his usually composed face completely vulnerable. "May I read it?" he asked quietly. Rebecca handed him the envelope. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Simon took it carefully, like it was made of glass. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, lined notebook paper, covered in a child's careful handwriting. Some of the letters were wobbly, the writing of someone very weak, very sick, but determined to finish. Simon read it silently first, his jaw clenching, his eyes filling with tears. Then he looked up at Rebecca. "Can I read this aloud?" She nodded, unable to speak. Simon turned to face the audience, the letter in his hands. His voice shook as he began to read. "Dear Mr. Cowell, by the time you read this, I'll probably be gone. The doctors say I have a few weeks, maybe less. I'm not scared anymore. I just wanted to tell you something before I go. When you came to visit, you said I had to keep fighting. But the truth is, I did keep fighting. Every single day. Not fighting to live, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Fighting to not be scared. Fighting to still be me. Fighting to remember that even when everything hurts and you're so tired you can't move, people still matter more than winning. You taught me that without even knowing it. Just by sitting with me. Just by being there. I want you to remember that too. When you're on TV being mean to people, I want you to remember that being right isn't as important as being kind. You don't have to stop being honest. Just remember that behind every person is a story you don't know. Thank you for sitting with me. Thank you for holding my hand. You made my last good day the best day. Love, Sophie. Simon's voice broke on the last line. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and held it against his chest. Then he looked at Rebecca. She kept this for 19 years? She made me promise, Rebecca whispered. She said you'd need it someday. Simon walked to the judge's desk, picked up the golden buzzer remote, and returned to Rebecca. He pressed it without hesitation. Golden confetti exploded. The audience erupted. But Simon didn't celebrate. He just pulled Rebecca into an embrace while she sobbed into his shoulder. Thank you, he said quietly, loud enough only for her to hear. Thank you for keeping your promise. Share and subscribe, so this story will never be forgotten. The letter is now framed in Simon's office. Next to it, the photograph of him and Sophie. Together, they sit where he can see them every day. Sophie's wish came true. Simon Cowell remembered. And he never forgot again.